Hi, this is Mrs. Roberts, and we are going to be working on the 6.1 and 6.2 resource, also known as classical conditioning scenarios. If you'd like to follow along with what's happening on the screen, be sure to grab a paper copy of this. Should be located in the back of the room. First of all, I'd like to talk about these letters that are located here. You've probably become sort of familiar with them in doing your notes. So I'd like to talk about these two first. So we're going to start with an unconditioned stimulus. And we'd like to go ahead and, if you can, follow along with me on your paper. Go ahead and make like a nice little blurb on your paper. So go ahead and give yourself a label here. So that way, if you come back to this paper later on in the year, whenever you haven't been working on this, that it'll help to kind of be a memory aid. So our first term, unconditioned stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus is something that elicits a very natural response or an unconditioned response. So we're going to go ahead and type that in here, unconditioned response. An unconditioned response is a natural response that you would have to whatever stimulus that you are given. So in this case, when we talk about an unconditioned stimulus and response, again, that's always natural in nature. It's something that would cause this naturally. Whenever we're doing classical conditioning, we generally want this pairing, especially your unconditioned stimulus, to have something to do with one of the four F's. And by that, I mean fight, flight, food, or fornication. You've just watched a video describing the famous dog experiment done by Pavlov. He used food, which is something that dogs are highly motivated by. So he used food to elicit a natural response in dogs, which is salivation, a natural response in any animal. So another one you learned about was Little Albert. Watson in that particular case, or not Watson, lies to you, Watson, truth. He actually used a fight or flight response, right? So a fear. He used the loud noise to create a fearful response from Little Albert. Okay, so we've got our unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. We need to remember that those are going to be sort of a natural pairing. Now, whatever it is that you want to actually create kind of that new that new response from is called the conditioned stimulus. So we're going to go ahead with that one. There we are. So this is our new thing we're going to be introducing. And you probably learned this whenever you're doing your notes, but we always want to produce this conditioned stimulus first when we're using classical conditioning. We want to produce the bell before we give the food. This is again called forward pairing because what we want the animal to do is we want the animal to associate and anticipate getting that unconditioned stimulus. So you would ring the bell and then produce the food. The dog will salivate in anticipation of the food. Lastly, we have this, it's your conditioned response. And this is always going to be the same or very similar to this, the unconditioned response. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that, change that to an orange, and I'll go ahead and put this in orange too so that you guys can see that those need to be the same or similar. Now, what is this over here? This can be one of two things. So generally what we call this is the neutral stimulus. So this is the one that basically has no meaning. It should be the exact same as the conditioned stimulus. Now, sometimes people use this one in psychology and they call it the natural stimulus. So sometimes they make these two the same, but for our purposes, we're going to call this the neutral stimulus. So you can see that when you're coming up with this kind of, when you're looking through these scenarios, all you really need to know are three different things. One of them is a response and two of them are stimuli, right? So just one is a response, two of them are stimuli. And you'll notice that two are the same here, two are the same here. So two, there we are. Now let's look at the model. It's your first day of college. Ah, yes, your first experience with dorm life. You are standing in the shower trying to wake up when you hear someone flush the toilet. Then, a few seconds later, the shower water turns scalding hot. You yell and jump out of the way. After the water temperature returns to normal, you resume the shower. But someone else flushes the toilet. The water gets hot. You jump again. Sooner or later, sooner I hope, you begin to jump out of the way as soon as you hear a toilet flush without waiting to get burned. You've been conditioned. All right, so in this scenario, what we want to do first is we want to try to figure out what is the response. So that's usually where I start. So the response is obviously jumping, right? So jumping out of the way. So that means that's here too. So jumping out. And I'm not going to continue because I'll run out of space here. Now, what naturally causes you to jump out of the way? That's going to be hot water, right? Now, over time, you start to associate something else that was previously neutral that had no meaning to you whatsoever. And that neutral thing was the toilet flush. Eventually, though, you are conditioned and you see this toilet flushing as your conditioned stimulus. So soon enough, when anyone flushes the toilet, you jump out of the way in anticipation of this unconditioned stimulus. All right, so let's look at these new scenarios. I'll do a few with you and then I'll let you do the rest. We can check them whenever I return. All right, so the first one. While crossing an intersection, you are nearly run down by a car. The next time you approach that intersection, you find yourself feeling nervous. Your palms are sweating, your heart's racing, etc. Okay, so let's do the same thing that we did with the first, which is let's find the response first. So our response is something we can see. That's going to be feeling nervous. So I'm going to use that same color highlighter. You can label this on your paper if you'd like to as the unconditioned response and the conditioned response. Now, what naturally made you feel nervous? Well, that's getting run down by a car. That's fracking scary, right? All right, so that's going to be our yellow. Now, what have you now been conditioned to believe that you might get run down by a car at? That's the intersection. So you have been conditioned to believe that possibly at that intersection, you might get run down by a car. So again, this is you learning. It's a really key part of being a human. It's how you survive. It's how you thrive. So let's go to this second one. It's a little bit more complicated. You see a photo in a magazine showing a big piece of chocolate cake, and you discover that your mouth is watering. All right, let's start again. What is our response? So something we can see. That's our mouth watering. So we're going to highlight that one with orange. Now, what naturally causes your mouth to water? That is a piece of chocolate cake. So our natural response to seeing food as humans, not seeing food, but smelling food, tasting food, that's going to be mouth watering. And that is just because it helps kind of coat the esophagus, allows the digestive tract to begin to function. It's basically starts a whole big process in your stomach. Now, when you see a photo, it's not the cake at all, but you just see the photo of the cake, your body will respond the same way. And that's because you've been conditioned. There we are, the photo. Beautiful. All right, let's go to number 3. A mother-to-be suggests to her husband that if the baby were a girl, she'd really like to name her Susan. Her husband objects strongly, saying he really dislikes that name. All right, what's the response first? That's going to be a strong dislike. So we're just going to do really dislikes. That's going to be in orange. Now, what is the unconditioned stimulus, the thing that naturally caused him dislike? Well, it's definitely going to be something that's not in this scenario, right? So it's going to be a girl named Susan. So we're going to have to write that in. So our unconditioned stimulus is going to be a girl named Susan, who probably, did something horrible to him. I have a similar scenario, similar memory to the name Nathan. You're welcome. Now, what exactly is the conditioned stimulus? Now, the conditioned stimulus is the name Susan. All right, those are all the ones I'll do with you together. So we've done these. Good luck for the rest of these, again, 4 through 5. Thanks.